Life of a intersexual boy more girl. James was a boy's boy and made no excuses for it. He took all the same lumps, bumps, and bruises as all the other 9-year-old boys his age did. This wasn't his first visit to the hospital, and his mom was pretty sure it wouldn't be the last. She watched as James seemed to get some thrill from the nurse that was wrapping his ribs with an ace bandage. Granted, that did nothing to ease the pain he was feeling between his legs. The spill he had taken on his bike had caused him more than a slight amount of pain this time. To Carol Connors, it was almost cute how the tight ace bandage caused him to look as if he had breasts. It was baby fat, she told herself, but then a girl wouldn't have her missing work for a trip to the hospital either. Sure, a girl could wreck her bike much the same as a boy, but then a girl wouldn't pick the biggest hill in town to take the plunge on. Never mind plowing through a fence and landing in the neighbor's swimming pool. When the nurse was done, James walked lightly out to the car, while his mom talked to the doctor and paid the bill. "I think his breasts are bigger now than the last time we saw him," Dr. Marcus said, in a soft tone. "I am sure they are, and as you can see he is actually losing some weight," Carol replied. "He's still rather husky for a 9-year-old, the doctor said, as she wrote on her report. 20 pounds is a lot to lose for a boy his age," Carol replied. "I am watching every bite he takes and making sure it is not junk food and the likes," she added. "Well, I took another blood sample, but I suspect this one will be no different than the last," the doctor said with a smile. As they rode home, there was no denying his breasts were holding his t-shirt away from the rest of his torso. His nipples made pinpoints in his favorite Kiss t-shirt, now torn from the spill on his bike. As they talked, James told his mom how much he liked the tight feel of the ace bandage. He remarked that it would have been like extra padding had he had it on before the spill on his bike. A light went off in Carol's head, but then, just as quick, she dismissed the idea. It wasn't till bedtime, when James refused to take off the ace bandage, that the idea she had earlier took root. Carol knew she had it somewhere, and having looked in most every place she could think of, the cedar chest in the garage was the only place left. She had to all but empty the cedar chest, but there it was. The training corset she had worn when she was a girl. James might balk at the soft material over the cups, but, if he likes that tight feel of something wrapped around him, this just might work. Carol had saved much of her wardrobe from when she was a girl. She had hoped to have a daughter of her own someday to pass some of it down to. That wasn't going to happen now, or not the way she saw it. Her husband and love of her life, save James, had been killed in Operation Desert Storm. James would never be like his father. His small frame and delicate features made a person have to look just to know he was a boy. It was Saturday and Carol was up early. It was almost automatic now since she worked almost 7 days a week. The alarm clock was more of an afterthought than a necessity these days, and James was still sound asleep. As she sat drinking her coffee, she was also thinking of how she would approach James with the idea of wearing the corset. She didn't want to really deceive her son, so the truth with a twist would have to do. If it worked, then that was good. If it didn't, then that was good, too. She would find another way to curb his wild streak. Unlikely as it may seem, James loved coffee as much as his father did. Just as she poured James a cup and set it aside for him to have later, he came padding into the kitchen. "Morning, Mom," he said, as he gave her a hug. "You're up early," she replied while returning the hug. James took the coffee and sat at the table next to her, not saying why he was up so early. "You're not going to be showing those off all day, are you?" she said, as she pointed at his nipples poking through his thin pajama top. "Well, it's not like I can hide them," he said with a pouting face. "And yours show, well, sometimes, I mean," he said, taking another sip of coffee. "Well, you could hide them, but I think you kinda like showing them off." She teased him a little. "I doubt that, Mom," he hissed. "Especially with the ace bandage making them look so big right now," he added. "This would hide them," she said, as she placed the corset on the table. "And you can make it plenty tight enough to hold your broken rib in place," she added. She knew full well James had never seen a corset before and probably knew nothing about them. She seized the chance to explain to him that both men and women wore them back years ago. Years later they were known to be more for the women than the men. Still, it would fit tight and hide his prominent nipples at the same time. She watched as James in wide-eyed amazement handled the corset with some care. That was surely not his normal way. He was tough on everything. After he had looked the garment over for more than a few minutes, he gave her his assessment. "Well, it might work, but with the lacing thing in the back I would have to have some help to get it on and off," he stated, sure of himself. "I thought so too the first time I got to wear one, but there are ways around that," Carol offered. "It seems rather small in the middle," he said, as he examined it more closely. "It is a little smaller, but then that helps with your posture, and you know the teacher is always on you about slumping down in your chair," Carol reminded him. He set the garment aside for the moment and drank the rest of his coffee. In a way, Carol was thrilled that he had not dismissed the idea of wearing the corset offhand. She felt sure once he had it on he would fall in love with it. The corset would work just as good or better than the ace bandage for his hurt ribs, and properly tightened it would make it so his stomach wouldn't allow him to eat so much either. That was a 2-for-1 deal she could like. He knew 1 cup of coffee was all he would get. So with that drank, he asked his mom to help him get out of the ace bandage so he could take a shower. Careful not to seem as if she was pushing the issue, she asked if he was willing to try the corset. If not, she was going to put it away. James knew she was a tidy housekeeper, so he didn't suspect her. "I guess so," he said, as he headed off to the shower. In the shower, James took inventory of himself. Even he could tell he had lost some weight. At school, he played just as hard as the rest of the boys, but at home, he ate twice as much as they did. He had been picked on as the fat kid, but if he had his way that would soon be over. To his eyes, his mom had just offered him the best way of all to hide how fat he really was. Of course, he couldn't act as thrilled as he was. No boy ever falls for something his mom suggests. One thing Carol would never have to worry about was James being clean and neat. She and her husband, Sean, had drilled that into him from the time he started walking and talking. She was making their breakfast as he took his shower all the time, hoping he would follow through on her suggestion of the corset. His days of being the fat kid would come to an end real soon if he did. James listened intently when he turned off the shower, knowing his mom would come to make sure he was clean. His steadfast refusal to get a haircut now had him using both shampoo and conditioner the same as his mom did. In a way, he didn't mind it, save that it smelled like flowers. That was so not cool for a boy his age. It was a mock inspection, as Carol knew he would be clean as a whistle. Still, it was her chance to see just how he was developing. She looked him over, checked behind his ears, and then gave him a gentle swat on the butt. "If you're going to wear the corset, it needs to go on first," she said, as if it was a reminder of something he had already agreed to. He paused and hung his head. "Okay, Mom, I'll try it if that is what you want." Carol brought the corset and liner to his room. She showed him first how to position the liner and then how to place the corset before he started to tighten it. She tightened it just a little at first, and he complained that it was pinching his chest. She moved close behind him and showed him how to scoop the loose skin of his breast into the cups. She didn't want to scare him out of it before he even started, so she told him to say when it was tight enough. James just watched wide-eyed in the mirror as the garment slimmed his waist and flattened his tummy. No one would call him the fat kid with this corset on, he thought to himself. Carol stopped just past being halfway closed in the back. You can tighten it more if you want to, I'll show you how later, she said as she left him to finish getting dressed. The corset wasn't tight at all, and that wasn't the reason Carol stopped when she did. The cups of the corset were full to the max and, if she remembered correctly, they were B cups. She could only hope that as he lost the extra pounds the breasts would go away as well. James picked one of his loose t-shirts to wear that day, and even so he tucked it in the waist of his pants. His pants were actually loose on him now, and there was no way to deny it, he had boobs. He didn't really mind the fact that he had boobs, it was the fat kid jokes that bothered him. He didn't look so fat now, and to him, that was a good thing. When Carol first saw him she had to stifle a very big laugh. His pants looked as if he could swim in them, and she knew right off that would never work for school. His midterm break would soon be over, and there was no way she could afford another round of shopping for school clothes. He ate just half of his normal breakfast before he said he was full. Carol knew in her heart then she had done the right thing. The best way for a boy his age to lose weight was to eat less, and the corset was already showing that effect. Now she saw another problem coming at her head-on. No way was her child going to school in baggy pants. Carol worked at a garment factory and had taken in the garage for a sewing room. She did alterations as well as designing some of her own clothes. She quickly measured his waist, and it was almost the same as hers. He wasn't as tall as she was, but that was just a matter of time. His father was tall and she was, as well, so in time she figured he would be, too. She measured his hips and surreptitiously measured his breasts. Indeed, he filled out the B cups to the max. She wasn't about to tell him that, but she could alter some of her old jeans to fit him for the time being. Once his body weight was down to what a normal boy of his age should be, she was more than willing to buy him some new clothes. She was none too happy that her child was being teased as the fat kid, herself. Carol was stunned that he took to wearing her old jeans like a duck to water. The fact that the zipper and button were on the other side of his didn't seem to faze him at all. What stunned her more was that he wore the corset to bed in every waking hour, save to take it off long enough to shower. She didn't make him do that at all, it was his choice and she was proud of him for it. As for the jeans, she had picked only the ones she wore early in her pregnancy since those had the biggest waist. All she really had to do was hem the legs, and she did that by adding the old-style sailor's cuff. If he continued to wear them, she could always let it back out later. Once school started back, James was excused from PE because of his ribs. To the other boys that knew how it happened, this made him a big man, so to speak. After all, none of them had dared to try riding blind man's bluff. So-called because it was so steep and the turns so sharp you couldn't see around them. James had made it to the bottom only to find out he had no brakes. Then he crashed into the backyard of the prettiest girl in school. Becky Harris, the only girl in the whole school that could really fill out a sweater. His first day back at school after the broken sort of set the tone for the rest of the year. The older jocks that had never been his friends to start with avoided him. The guys that knew him and were his real friends kinda accepted him as a hero for the stunt he had pulled. It was his acceptance of the girls that threw him off balance. Even the aforementioned Becky Harris came to his comfort when some of the other girls teased him about his breasts. "At least we have some boobs," Beck shouted at one of the other girls as she walked home with James. "I don't see how you do it," she turned and spoke to James. "Every girl in the class has at least some boobs, but you and I are the ones that get picked on," she stated with some anger in her voice. James was unsure of just what to say. The last thing he wanted to do was mess up a newfound friendship with the prettiest girl in the school. "My mom says it's just baby fat and they will go away at some point in time. I have seen you out shopping with your mom, my guess is yours will only get bigger," he said in a very unsure tone. Becky laughed as much at what he said, as to how he said it. Yes, Mom has told me the same thing, but they could at least wait till I am older, she replied with a smile. Well, maybe we will both get our wish, James replied. Our wish? What do you mean by that? She asked. Well, maybe your breasts will stop growing till you get a little older and mine will go away with the rest of my body fat. Mom has me on a diet, he added. Oh, so it's cool if I have breasts, but it's not so cool for you. Becky replied, sounding stern. I didn't mean it that way. You're a girl, you're supposed to have breasts, and you're the prettiest girl in school. I'm a guy. We're not supposed to have breasts. That's all I meant to say. And what happens if they don't go away? Becky asked with some intent in her voice. I'm not sure. I guess I will just be stuck with them, James replied. James walked with her past his house and across the park to the stairs that led down to her house. He so wanted to run home and tell his mom about his new friendship with Becky, but then how could he tell her it was because they had the biggest boobs in class or that she had taken up for him when the other kids made fun of his boobs? Carol wasn't so disconnected from her son's life not to smell the perfume on his clothes. When she asked him about it, he, of course, told her about Becky, just not the reason they were close enough for her perfume to get on his clothes. It was a very pretty scent that Carol recognized as being popular with the younger girls. She was thankful for whatever reason that her son now had a female friend. It was a really cold winter and that alone was enough to keep James in the house on most days. He faithfully walked Becky home every day, stopping only at the stairs to bid her goodbye. They even shared a few weekends together as she came to visit him and he, in turn, returned the favor. Becky soon realized her grades had shot up. Studying with James had proven he was the smart kid in class, as most had thought. The thing was he wasn't the rude and crude macho type she had pegged him to be. He was actually a very caring and lovable young man. He wasn't really her type, as she preferred the more physically fit boys. James knew his friendship with Becky would be short-lived. Their mutual teasing over their breasts had brought them together and once he were gone, so too went Becky. That was the way he saw it and that was what he eventually told his mom. Carol had not missed the slow but sure progress James was making with the corset. Every morning now he would loop the lacing over the doorknob of the door to his room and pull with all his might to get it as tight as he could possibly stand it. While she was sure he had long ago lost enough weight to be what was considered normal for a boy his age, she was content to let him continue to wear the corset. His breasts were none smaller than they had been at the start. If anything, they might have gotten some bigger. As spring came in, so did his hips and now Carol was getting worried. There was no reason for this to happen or none that she knew of. She had on the sly measured his breasts and indeed they had gotten bigger. That added to his hips was a sure alert to her that something was not right. The friendship between James and Becky had blossomed into much more than just a casual friendship. They often studied together and invited each other over for meals. James probably didn't realize it at the time, but he was as good a girl to speak as Becky was. To hear them together and not see them you would swear they were two girls having a great time. James still hung out with the boys when Becky wasn't around, but that wasn't often. As the school year came to a close, Carol realized James no longer struggled to close the corset each morning. She had taken in the waist of his pants as he had lost the extra weight, but she had no idea it had been fully closed in the back for a month now. James hadn't considered the idea that the corset was made for a girl or that it would make his body end up shaped like one as well. For him, it was all about losing the weight and for now, he figured he had accomplished just that. He was now a skinny 70-pound fifth grader, save the fact that he still had boobs. He and Carol had agreed he no longer had to diet when he got to 80 pounds. Still, he would not give up the corset or the diet for that matter. She figured as soon as summer came into full swing, the corset would have to go. The hot weather would make it all but unbearable to wear.